Ali continues to scream at Terrell as he applies the leather. And at the bell, Ali...
The greatest of all time, the greatest combat sports, the greatest boxer, the greatest sportsman, one of the most well-known human beings ever to walk the planet, at least in modern times. Talking about Muhammad Ali, of course, who recently passed. Now, I know this is a little afterwards, but it's something I've been meaning to get out here. Unfortunately, some other tragic events have happened since, and my hearts and prayers go out to the people of Orlando. But why am I talking about Muhammad Ali in the first place? This is a military channel. Well, there's a very good reason, and let's talk about Muhammad Ali and the draft. Now, if somehow you don't know who Muhammad Ali is, which I just seriously doubt anyone doesn't know, he is literally one of the most famous people in the world. Even people under that supposed rock, they know who Muhammad Ali is. But a little background on him: he is one of the most famous boxers in the world, one of the most famous people in the world, former 3-time heavyweight champion. One of those championships was stripped for a reason we'll get to for this video. Boxed from the early 60s to the early 80s. Unfortunately developed Parkinson's. Was a statesman, a spokesman, even a diplomat, and a negotiator for many, many years. He was born Cassius Clay, came out as an amateur, won the Olympic gold medal, which he apparently threw in a river. Never heard that story relating to back in the South. He was from Kentucky, and he was not allowed to be served because of his race. He was a black man, of course. So he went and threw his Olympic medal in the river. At least how the story goes. Just because he wasn't happy with segregation and the racism of the country. Part of this led to his conversion to the Nation of Islam, where he changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. Now, this is part of a bigger story, not just his religious conversion from Christianity to Muslim Islam, but the larger picture of the 60s going on here. This was the height of the civil rights era. Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, whatever have you, was out in the forefront of, demanding rights for blacks. Not even necessarily equality. There's a lot of things you can kind of get on him about. What we're going to talk about, the draft, I would argue is not one of them, which we'll get to. But he was one of those that was actually asking for true separation, separate but equal, but not the way it was being done. This was, the Nation of Islam, this was one of their tenets back then too. They wanted nothing to do with white people, blah, 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 blah. So, among other things, he was not a saint. He not always had the best ideas. But overall, his importance in history cannot be denied. He was a guy who stood up for his beliefs. He was a person who made boxing way more exciting than it had ever been before. Just, this trash talker, this guy with all the rhymes, and, he kind of took from pro wrestling, classy Freddie Blassie and gorgeous George, and, took it into boxing and, was making something exciting. And, there were tons of, the black community really ate him up and enjoyed him. The white community, for the most part, at the beginning, really didn't like this guy. In fact, it took, nearly till the end of his career before, America as a whole came around to him. And one of the reasons was, his refusal to serve in Vietnam, or at least to answer the call of the draft during Vietnam. Now, giving you a little background on this, going through American history back to about the Civil War, in times of war, America has enacted a draft service. If you don't know what that means, it means a male over 18 has to sign up for what's called selective service. And in times of war, or in times of perpetual draft, which we had from World War II till about mid-70s, once you reach a certain age, you'll be put in a draft pool, and if your number's called up, you have to go and be tested for service. Now, honestly, there is a lot of ways to get out of this. If you go back to my Don't Ask, Don't Tell video, back in the day, that was an easy way to get out of it. Just say you were gay. Of course, there could be repercussions for that, socially, but, honestly, that was a way to get out of it. You could have an injury or, some kind of physically disqualifying thing if your mental scores weren't high enough. Now, here's another thing about this. Muhammad Ali's IQ was tested at 78, which is considered borderline and was disqualifying for service at the time. Now, talk about, how good those IQ tests are. Most people who knew Muhammad Ali said he was well above a borderline in terms of intelligence. Maybe he just didn't take the test well, who knows. But regardless, soon after that, they changed and lowered the score. He was put back in the draft. Now, of course, because of his religious beliefs and personal beliefs, especially towards going to fight for a country who he didn't believed in him to go fight some other poor kids in another part of the world, he just totally didn't agree with.
My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother or some darker people or some poor, hungry people in the mud for big, powerful America and shoot them for what? They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They never put no dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality, raped and killed my mother and father. What, I'm going to shoot them for what? How can I go shoot them? Them little poor little black people, little babies and children and women. How can I shoot them poor people? Just take me to jail.
Now, see, that's exactly how he felt, and so a lot of other people felt that way. And a lot of people weren't really happy with him. And even to this day, especially right after his death, there were people who brought this up, showing, he wasn't the greatest human being. Now, here's where I draw a line on this between what you would normally call a draft dodger and what you call someone who's a conscientious objector. Now, there were several people who, got called up for draft. That was their reason for not wanting to go into the draft, was they were against the war. They were conscientious objectors. This did work for some people. The famous humor writer, Dave Barry, he got off on a conscientious objector from getting on the draft. But his situation was he was the son of a Presbyterian minister. I believe he was going to a Christian college at the time. And, the board accepted this. Other people have got physical deferments. Famously, some very pro-war, more conservative types, Rush Limbaugh, Donald Trump, got some, what people have said are questionable deferments for physical ailments, especially Donald Trump, who apparently had a problem with his ankle, but then he played sports in college. That's a story for another time, but, comparing that to a guy who just strictly said, no, I don't believe in this war and I refuse to fight it. I refuse to go in the military, and stood his ground. He did not, run to Canada. He did not try to get a bullshit deferment, which he probably could have, with the right lawyers, the right slickness. No, he was very determined to stick to his guns despite everything that was going on, to the point where, they said come or be, go or be arrested. He chose being arrested. He had his title stripped from him, and he ended up fighting this for 3 years until he won the right on an appeal. Now, around about the time he came back, he was restated in boxing. The tide towards the Vietnam War had changed a lot too. A lot more people were agreeing with what Muhammad Ali said in the first place. And we're kind of coming back around on him from being the big villain, or at least the big villain to white America. More people were accepting of him and were waiting to see him as a big hero. And he continued on his career. Of course, had the great matches with Frazier and Foreman, up until the 80s when his Parkinson's started to get real bad on him. So, that's the basic story. And I bring this up just because, I think a lot of it boils down to your personal take on it. Regardless of your feelings, should you go into service when called, or if you have very strong personal beliefs about the war, should you, make your presence known and not be forced to go serve? Is conscription the right thing to do? We abolished it in 1974, I believe, after it had been, going on essentially since World War II. There was a nonstop draft, even in times of non-war, between World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. But today, selective service still exists in case of there's a need. A lot of people would argue we'll never go back to the draft, but it could happen. The process is still in place with selective service. Now, personally, as someone who has worked with people in the military that didn't want to be there, and how terrible, what discipline problems they were, their work was always shoddy, and their attitude was bad. They brought down morale as a whole. And these were people who volunteered to sign up in the first place. I could not imagine working with someone who was drafted, someone who did not want to be there and went there because of the fear of jail. How terrible, someone who had zero interest in ever being in the military and was forced to go there by their government. I wouldn't want to work with those people, and I can't imagine in this day and age needing to work with those people. So overall, my personal opinion, I think he did the right thing. I admire him for sticking by his guns. I know there's people who disagree with me, and that's your right as an American. Luckily, we can have these discussions here on YouTube. which you are welcome to do in the comments. I'm sure a lot of you have very strong opinions on it one way or the other. That is it for the Salty Seaman. Like and subscribe to this video. Help me get this channel going out, get the word out, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.